This is Soundcraft Sessions. My name is Gabriel Roux, and this is session number 3 of our 15-part Soundcraft VI training. And today we're looking at layout. So where to find everything on the console. We're going to spend most of the time on our overhead cam. Great, so let's get into it. First thing we want to look at is just our screen. So obviously for each of the input banks we've got an input screen. This is called a Vistonic screen, and in the next session I'm going to spend a lot of time on what is going on here. Basically refers to our patch points and our naming, also our EQs, how to use them, how to insert a dynamic EQ, compression, our aux sense or bus sense, and then also at the end how to do insert, direct out, assign something to masters, so on and so forth. vMix, virtual mix is all in this little block here. This will be in the next session, so I'm not going to spend any time on this today. For now we want to just know where to find what on the console. I've patched a few inputs here. Reason is, one of the features that are here is our little setup button. So this comes down to how this console was designed. So when you're looking for a certain feature, for instance, you want to change how a mute group works or a VCA works, or how to view a VCA, for instance, the first place where you want to look is on the surface itself. Chances are, if it's a mix-related or an operator-related process, that it won't be in the sub-menus. And we're going to look at the sub-menus in a moment, and you'll see there's not a huge amount of stuff in there, because most of the functions happen on the surface itself, which is great. I love that about the console, because it means we are working the console, right? We're not going through menus having to push the same button 5 times to get to a specific menu to change a pre or post scenario on an aux. Great. So that's a very important thing to remember. So just to continue, we've got these rotaries at the top. They do have different uses. Also something else that you will realize at the moment is that there's always a part of the console that is fixed or predefined. Like for instance, this is the input fader pages. On the left we've got A, B, C, D, so this is looking at different inputs. And on the right hand side we've got the user ones. User 1 to 5. So it's also referring to input banks, but they are flexi. We can manipulate them, and that's why there's a setup button here. I'll look at this again in a moment, but it's also important to understand what is user definable and which of these buttons are predefined. So in this case with the input fader pages, A to E is predefined and 1 to 5 is not. The same thing applies to when we're looking at output banks. So that's when you switch on the console, when you load a standard file. A is aux 1 to 8, and now it's groups 9 to 16 and so on and so forth. And then D is just blank, but we can manipulate it to put something else here. I'll do it on the offline editor so it's nice and clear for everyone to understand. Rotaries at the top here. At the most common use for this is to look at a gain. So these buttons here refer to the section here. That button there says input gain. So when I push that, when I pull that up, we're changing the gain. Something that's interesting to notice, and I thought I'll just mention this. There's a lot of visual cues concerning where we are and what we're busy working on. So for instance, at the moment I've patched mic 1, and in the Vistonics page I'm going to spend a lot of time on these menus, how this Vistonics page work. But for now, just trust me, input 1 is patched to mic 1, there we go. And obviously because it's patched to a physical input, there's a gain. If I have to change this patch point to a digital input, something's going to happen on the console that's quite interesting, is the fact that visually the rotary will also now look different. If I go Dante 1, yeah, this rotary doesn't go all the way down to 0 anymore, or to a starting position of 0, which is which is plus 10. It's now in the middle, so it gives us an indication that this is patched to a digital input. You can see it start right in the top there. And we can now trim up and down, because obviously digital inputs, and that one now is trimmed down to minus 36. I can go all the way up again. Digital inputs can't be gained, but they can be trimmed. And I'm going to try and highlight all these little visual cues. There's quite a lot of them, especially when it comes to Vistonics. Up here, there's a lot of data. When it comes to the screen here, there's a lot of information here. There it tells you the patch point and the name. All these little markings that's gained and trim and pad. So just by looking at the Vistonics screen, you can get a huge amount of info. Which brings me back to this design of the VIs, where we want to keep the user on the console and give him as much information as possible. I love this, because if you think about working on an analog console, what makes it great? Obviously, analog consoles sound great. But secondly, what makes an analog console great is that you've got all the information in front of you. When you look at the EQ and the sends, aux sends on channel 8 on analog console, you can see all of them. You don't have to skip between pages to see where the send, if it's open or closed. When you look up, when you look at the gain, you can see it. If you're working on an analog system and you've got compressors and gates in a rack, you can just look left, and there you can see if your gate's open or closed, your compressor's working or inserted. All that information is in front of you. And the VI gives you that similar feel where the information is staring you in the face, you know. It's right there. You don't have to go into menu or sub-menus. So click or select and then push another button to go into EQ. It's right there, easy to access. And the same thing is with the way the encoders work and the way we change the setup of a specific feature. So input rotaries, there's a button here with a little F on it. Normally what this is programmed to do is if I push the F button, function key button, it skips between my two inputs. So it's there. And if I push it, so each channel has got more than one input. You can use the one input for main and the other one for backup. So for instance, if this channel is your bass guitar and you're taking the head out and a DI out, but you're not using both at the same time, you can use this function button. The reason why it's called function, because it does have a second function as well. So let's have a look. It's under settings, strip lock, function key. Now you'll see the channels are changing between the different banks, but that channel is staying up because we've locked the strip in place. Okay, so Vistonics input screen, master screen. These rotaries are, as I said, can be used for inputs, gates or pans. There is a setup for them where you can manipulate it because there's a user 1 and 2. So you can say, I want user 1 to be bus send 1, select. Now if I push user 1, these rotaries are manipulating aux 1. So these two users, and the console, wherever they've got users available, there's always a setup button. So same here, we're going to skip down now. So I'm explaining the console down like this, and then I'm going to grab the camera and I'll show you a close-up of what we can see here. So next thing down is our mute and VCA groups. Once again, it's got a setup button. So to set up a mute group, very easily you select the setup button, select the mute group and what you want to assign to it. We are spending time on this later on. Also VCAs. There's also a dialog on screen that explains how to make a mute group and a VCAs, but I'm doing a session about it. Something I would like to speak about now is, because we're not coming back to this later on, I've mentioned certain features are predefined. So for instance, the input, gates and pans are predefined on these rotaries. but there's two user groups. Same thing applies to our input banks. So input bank A, B, C, D, and E have channels assigned to them. On the VI1, there's already channels assigned to 1 to 5, user 1 to 5. But that's not the case on the bigger consoles, because obviously we've got a lot more faders, so we don't have to use these buttons. They don't have to be assigned, but we can manipulate it. So for instance, this is user 5. In this case, channel 73 to 80 is assigned here. But I can also change this. So let's look at how to change it. We're going to push the setup button. We've got our banks there, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Let's have a look on the offline editor what that looks like. Let's go to user 1. I can change this, so I can say that channel 16 I want to allocate something else there, so I push setup, brings this screen up, and it's user 1, so it'll be that channel there, and I can say I would rather want a VCA there, VCA 1, undo the setup, and now in that position is a VCA. So if we go back to the console, you'll see that's now a carbon copy of this. So it's important to understand that these ones, it says fixed A, B, C, D up to E. We can't manipulate the order of the faders or assign different things to them, but the user groups we can bring up different things. So for instance, we can move the channels around, or put a VCA in there. Essentially, you can then arrange these banks and any of these users in any order that you see fit. Great, so then just to recap, encoders, function, input, and also to lock a fader into place. Isolation is to isolate a specific channel. We talk about isolates later, so I'm not going to talk about it now. But basically what isolation means this channel is now excluded from our snapshots. So it's basically, it allows us to mix this live. So there's some cool, very, very, very cool information about how isolations work, and I love talking about it. So please make sure you catch that session. Obviously on-off buttons are quite self-explanatory. Mute groups and VCAs over here, these are where we navigate between our different inputs. So when we want to go to different places on the console input wise, we do it here. And there's a setup button to manipulate user 1 to 5. Great. So if I would make all the channels going to aux1 pre-fade, and then select that aux, that little light will come on. Just want to show you what that looks like. We're going to look at that in a moment again. So now channel 1 is pre-fade to aux1. Obviously when we talk about auxes, we'll refer to pre and post. Great. That brings me to this button here that I've just used. It's called the follow button. So that's basically when we want to flip to faders. So we don't want to use the rotaries. So that's one of the features of the rotaries, is to send channels to specific aux. So now we're sending to aux1, right? Or we can say we want this specific channel to different auxes, like that. So that's one of the features of the rotaries, or what we can use rotaries for. But obviously the most common way of doing it, and the nice way of doing it, is to use flip to faders. So we select the aux, and you'll see it's now changed color. There's a very good reason for this, because this fader glow tells us what bus we are sending to. So you'll see the auxes are orange, the groups are green, and the matrices are blue, like that. But there is one step that you have to do before this will work, and this is this little button here. So follow output solo needs to be on. Once that's activated, when we select our specific aux, this goes orange, which means now these channels are now sending to this aux, which brings me back to this little light here. If it's not on, it means it's post-fade, and we'll have to change it. Obviously, often for monitors, if we're mixing monitors from the same console, we need to go pre-fade. So otherwise, if we change our main mix, right, it will affect what goes to that aux, so it needs to be pre-fade. And that little light is especially for that function. If you want to know more about auxes and pre and post and where we use them and how to use them, please see our session on buses and auxes and matrices. Great. Just before we move on, I just want to say one more thing about layers, just to be 100% clear about it. And I think 99% of you guys will know what it is, but there might be one or two of you that are like, oh, what's this layers about and how does it work? So all that a layer is where we are looking at a specific time, right? What channel we're looking at. If it's a channel 1 to 8, or if you've maybe never worked on a digital console, this will be a little bit confusing, but think about it as like a screen on your iPhone or your Samsung. You flip them around, so the same screen is showing you different informations. So all it is, same as on your phone, by pushing the different layer buttons, A to E, which are fixed, or user 1 to 5, we're looking at different places on the console. So that's looking at 1 to 8, and now we're looking at 49 to 56. Same thing applies to the outputs. If I push button A here, I'm looking at aux 1 to 8. If I push that little button there, it says VCA, which by the way is also a fixed layer. I'm looking at VCA 1 to 8. Next thing obviously is select buttons, and there's a few places where we use these. Obviously, if we select this, then we are soloing the specific channel. So it will come through our monitors if we're using near-field monitors, and will also come out of our headphone outs, which is right here under my finger, just under the console, on the underside of this console. So select, also another feature of select is the fact that when I push it, it brings up an overview of that specific channel. If I push there, select, then this main menu is flipped over, so it looks a little bit different because the input's now sideways, so it's not from the top to the bottom. The input, EQs, dynamics, so on and so forth. A nice thing I like to do sometimes is when I want to send channel 1 to a whole bunch of different auxes, I will hold this in, go to my sends, and then just dial them up. Or you can pull them out. If I let go, then it'll go deselect that specific channel, like that. You'll find that this feature that I'm using now is if you hold it in, you go momentarily to a specific place on the console. So when it's a select, we're looking at the overview of that channel, and then we're out. Same thing on the layer. So if I'm on layer A and I go to layer C, I'm momentarily just looking to that place, to that page. Very handy, especially if I want to quickly go there, switch off those channels, and go back to where I was mixing. Same thing applies to the outputs. Now I'm momentarily looking at, which is group 9 to 16. If I unselect it, it'll go back to VCAs. So that applies to my layers and also to my selects. If I push it once and let it go, then it'll just go there and stay there. So 2 different ways for the same feature. Very handy. Awesome. So we're coming down here, we're going to work our way across and then up, and then I'll bring the other camera down so we can look at the buttons right over here. So the next thing, there is 2 Q buttons here. It's only the last and the next button. So it's exactly the same as these 2 under our snapshot control. Right. But you'll see when you start up the console, they are deactivated, because it can be quite dangerous having them on. If you accidentally do this with your elbow, you can go on to the next snapshot, which might be a mute scene, and that will be interesting. So you have to switch it on. It's under settings, and it's that button there. When it's on, I'll have to do it on the console as well. When we push it, it goes to the next snapshot. I do sometimes use it, but I switch it on just before I go into show. The rest of the time it's off, because you can get yourself in trouble if you do that with your elbow, or lean on the console. Someone maybe brings you lunch, you're at a show, and they accidentally push it by mistake. So normally I would have it off. Then the next thing is gangs. This little button here. Primarily what gang is, it links channels together momentarily. When I push it once, like that, and then I select a whole range, these faders are now linked together. Same with the dynamics, same with the EQs. It's a setup tool that we use to set up a certain feature. You can also use it to do patching. And I'm going to have a session where I talk just on gangers and all the uses thereof. Then there's a solo clear button. It's this guy here. When I have soloed a whole bunch of channels, and I want to clear it, I push solo clear. Maybe good to see how I use this. So we can select, hold in the first solo button, and then solo more than one channel, and deselect it that way. Or if I just select one at a time, it's now just doing a single channel when deselected like that. Then when it comes to this page here, which normally refers to our buses and our VCAs, you'll see they have exactly the same button. So they've got ons and offs, and select at the bottom. There's a mute safe there. We refer to this in the monitoring section. ISOs, the reason is obviously we can assign an input here, same as we assigned a VCA to these layers here previously. We can also assign an input here, and that's basically what that other startup file does, is basically exactly that. It's inputs that's been assigned to these layers. So once again, VCA is our fixed layer, and then A, B, C, D, and E can be anything. So at the moment, A is our auxes, as I said, in the groups, and matrices up to 24. D is empty, so I can assign a input here. Input 1, the kick channel. It's now assigned to this layer. Then we also have functions and ISOs, same as here, for that reason, because we've got a kick channel now there. Just a good thing to note, you'll find that when a channel is assigned here, the only way to EQ it is to use the select and to use that specific breakout. Like that. Just good to know. Then next to the output fader pages, we've got user definable keys. There's a few little things that you can assign. Mostly this is being used for taps is one of the primary reasons, or for instance when you go into the blackout, remember F6, if you push F6 it brings you out of the blackout. Very easy to use it. Like we can say F1 is open show page, and it does that. Very simple. Most common use for this is when we patch an effects unit and it's a delay. You'll see automatically that has now become our tap, like that. Great. Then this section here, some masters. So master on and off. We've got a left and right fader for left and right, and then also center for if you've got a center cluster. I know some people use the center for their subs. I don't think I've ever done it, but I often use it for my talkback. I insert my talkback onto the center fader here. Then to the right of it, we've got our masters. The console's got 2 masters for each of the monitoring buses. This console's got 3 monitor buses. It's got monitor A, monitor B, and obviously headphones right there. Here we go. Here's our left and right master. It's got a select button. That's our center. And then these are 2 monitor buses, headphones at the top there, monitor A and monitor B. And then there's a button that says solo blend. This pertains to how the monitor buses work. It allows us to do a blend between 2 different inputs that goes to the monitors. We've got solo trim. Solo trim allows us to trim each of our auxes. So for instance, if that's aux 1 and that's aux 2, they can have 2 different trims. This doesn't change what's going to the output of that aux. The only thing it manipulates is how loud we're monitoring it. So I don't know if you guys have ever been in a scenario where you've got an artist that has an extremely loud monitor mix. So when you're on the first aux, the monitor level is perfect. When you go to the second one, it's extremely loud. So this is the solution for it. If that's the maybe the one that's nice, but the second one is extremely loud, we can trim it down. And then whenever we listen to it on our Q wedge or our in-ears, it's not blasting our heads off. Very nice feature. Great, so for the next session, I'm just going to quickly just hang on this screen here because I just need to move the camera across, and just bear with me for a second while I do this. Just move some stuff out of the way. Put this camera. Great, so I want to talk now about what's the buttons to the left and the right of the screen, and I thought the best way of doing it is just to move my camera, because you'll notice that these buttons here are slightly different to what we're finding on the surface here. It can be a little bit confusing, so I thought let me just show it to you on a different angle. This angle's a bit steep. So we spoke about snapshots the other day. This is where our snapshot section is. Right, so in the previous session, if you missed any of that, you can go and check that out. Also, our talkback section is here. The talkback section on this console is phenomenal. This is also where you will find your oscillators. It's right there. We're doing a nice in-depth session about that. I'm going to leave the main menu for last, because I'm going to do it on the computer where we can see it nicely. There's 2 buttons here. The one's called input priority. It pertains to how the monitors work. So basically, in short, when I select a bus, and I select a channel, do I want the solo to always go back to the bus, or do I want to cancel the bus and only go to the solo? Once again, in the monitoring section, we'll take care of that. meter lock. So when the meter lock is on, I can select any of the channels and it won't jump there. So if I select a channel there, it's not showing me the overview. If I unselect it, it's showing me the overview of that specific channel. Obviously very handy when I am mixing front of house. So if this is meter lock is on, I can now use this to assign the channels to the bank on the right. In this case it comes here, so if I select there, my buses are coming up here. Bus 1 to 8, 9 to 16, 7 to 24 is now coming up here. Then we've got these two menus that says Vestonics and Vestonics here. This refers to what happens in this section here, so it's just view options. The switching functions is a little sub-menu within this menu. So A and B just refers to our buses, A and B. So these are masters, right? 1 to 8, so on and so forth. There's a talkback assign button. It allows us to assign a talkback to a specific aux momentarily. When I switch it here, it's ons and offs, so these are master ons and offs. And solo and select. I can also, by the way, use this specific solo to send to my aux, which is handy. Great, then we're moving over here. Our power button. Something that's good to know is when the power button is green, it means both power supplies are working. When it is red, it means only one of the power supplies are working. Like that. So I've switched off the top power supply. You can see they're hot swappable, so the console didn't go off, it just went over to the second one. Then there's a feature here that allows you to mute all outputs. So if for some reason you are in a scenario where you just quickly want to mute every single output on the console. So these are aux 1 to 8. If I hold it in, all the outputs are muted, including our left and right. When I push it again, it's live. Great, so nice handy little feature. Copy and paste, copy, paste, and to undo. Then all these buttons also refer to these sections here. So we've got a pre and post. Fast assign means if we want to assign something to this specific rotary just momentarily, it works like this. So I'm going to say fast assign. I want to see aux 3 here. So now our global view is all aux 3. Then we've got a pre and post button. This refers to our auxes. So whether our auxes are pre and post. You'll notice, so I mean there's aux 3. Once I push it, you'll see the selector has come up for that specific aux where it's pre or post. Like that. Something that's good to note, and I'm going to reiterate this in the next session, is the fact that for this function to work, you either need to be in a global mode where you're looking at auxes, or you need to select this function here. If you're looking, or if you have selected an EQ or dynamics, for instance, and you hit pre and post, nothing's going to happen because you're not currently looking at auxes or global view. So if you unselected, this is global view, and now you're seeing only aux 1. If you want to see aux 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on, you click there, pre and post. Now we can decide whether this channel, which is called kick, 91 is pre-fade or post-fade or pre-dynamics or pre-EQ. Great, then there's also a pan button. At the moment, when you look at this aux here, I'm just going to scoot the camera slightly over. At the moment when we're looking at aux 3, if I change it, look at our global view and it's now aux 1 up to 8. So on the camera we can see from 4 to 8. You'll see when I hit pre and post, we see the pre and post options. But when I hit the pan, nothing happens. And the reason for that is because none of these auxes are stereo. So I can change that quickly. I'm just going to make aux 8 stereo just for demonstration purposes. And now you'll see if I hit the pan button here, now aux 8 has got a pan. We can do the same thing over here, just maybe for clarity. Mix 1 to 8. Aux 8 stereo, as you can see. So once I've selected the aux, just there, and I say pre and post, that's obviously now flipping to pre and post, and I hit pan, you'll see the only one that's flipping over is aux 8. And now we can pan, decide whether this channel input 8, goes left or right with regards to the send aux 8. So then we've got these two buttons. They kind of work in conjunction with each other. The one is called fast assign. So basically what this means is if we want to see something here in global mode. So global mode for here is when nothing is selected. So we're not looking at auxes or dynamic or EQ. Nothing is selected on the screen. Everything is deselected. Now we're looking at the moment at a whole bunch of auxes straight through, but you'll see they're all aux 2. If we for some reason want to change this, we can use this button called fast assign. So there's two ways of doing this. You can either set up a user to have a default there. So if it's unselected, the user, it's aux 1 and 2. We can say the user setup should then be, for instance, for aux 4 and 5. Set. Now if we select the user, it's 4 and 5. Or we can use this function called fast assign. So we momentarily want to see something else there, not aux 1. We hold in this button here, fast assign, and then select the aux we want to see. So I'm going to select aux 4. Now we're looking at aux 4. We can do the same thing at the bottom here. Flip it to groups. So that's group 11. And then we unselect it. It goes back to its default, which is 1 and 2. If we select the user, it's 4 and 5. When it comes to the user, it's these two tabs here. So we say setup. We can now decide what we want it to be. So I can say the top one needs to be group 10 and the bottom row needs to be aux 6. Fantastic. And it works like that. So it's just a view option, obviously when nothing is selected on the screen. This now brings us to our main menu. Main menu button is here. And we're going to look on the computer, but just for now, that's that button there. Let's flip back to the computer. Primarily, the methodology behind the console is all the setup tools available on the console. I'm just going to put this camera back while I talk. So that means there's not a huge amount of things that's under the main menu. because the whole idea is that we want to keep the user on the console. That's why the setup buttons are the way they are, and most of the setup happens here and there. Pages setup, monitor setup, snapshot setup. Right, setup for these rotaries here. Setup for these rotaries here. Which means when we go into the menu, there's not actually quite a lot here. They're very simple. But let's take a look at them nonetheless. On the main tab, we can see the firmware of the console and the time. It also allows us to dim the screens if we want to. Then we've got our show tab, GPIO, general purpose ins and outs. Console do use these for effects. So for instance, you can see there's a tap delay going there. Internally. Then the sync options as pertains to the clocking on the console. So there's nothing we have to switch here except for the priorities when it comes to the Dante system. So if you plug in a clocking cable in the back of the console, it will automatically go to external. So that little button will light up. If we want to slave to a Dante network, we need to read this very carefully, because it's actually the other way around. It's interesting, but there is a nice description there. So when it says slave, it means the Dante network is slaving to the console. When it says master, it means the Dante network becomes the master. Tie lines allows you to make a patch point between two different places. So for instance, whatever comes into mic 1 should go out AS3. So it's a hard line patch. Right, it's like taking a cable, plugging it in one place, going out the other place, like we have in theaters in the old days. It's a hard connection, like a patch bay. Very handy to use, for instance, when you want to send a, say, ambient microphone from front of house to your monitor engineer, like that. So it's coming in mic 1. Obviously we have to just pull the gain up, and it's going up, out Dante and MIDI 1. Sorry, effects pages. When we talk about patching, I'm also going to touch on effects. vMix tab is there, virtual mix. Some MIDI features there. Logs. So the logs show us when we've had an error or a disconnection. For instance, a stage box got disconnected, or we lost a card, for instance. The error will come up on the log. Great, then the last two tabs are the ones you'll probably use the most. You've got the settings tab and the system tab. Under the settings tab is a few little things you can change. You can change the time and the date. It's one of the things. And then we can set the peak hold. This is how long a peak will hold once it hits a certain point. So for instance, a clip, how long the clip will still be visible before the metering goes back to what it's currently doing. Then there's an insert point. This is really handy, especially when it comes to running plugins. You want to be able to manipulate where the meters, what the meters are showing you. So you can change the metering point, post fade, or so on and so forth. Then to the left bottom here, we've got enable the next and last. That's the button that's right above the solo clear that allows you just to skip to the next or the previous snapshot. Then we've got backup interval. This is normally on. When you run a theater scenario, it might be a good idea, if it's something a show that you've been running for a long time, to be able to switch this off at some stage, so your show file doesn't unnecessarily get bigger and bigger and bigger. You can change it to 15 seconds or 30 seconds, so on and so forth. Then we've got the Dante and MIDI selection. As I've mentioned previously, on the outputs, the local, MIDI, and Dante are parallel, but on the inputs you have to decide which one you want to use. So let's quickly have a look at that. When it's on Dante and we go to local ins, right here, it says Dante, but we can then change that to MIDI, so it's either or. Obviously on the output you don't have to worry too much about it, because whatever's sending to Dante 1 is also sending to MIDI 1. Function key selection, we spoke about that in depth. Darks mode is direct out gain sharing. This is something I'm covering also later on, but for now this is where we'll switch it on. This allows you to do gain tracking between a gain and a trim or a gain and a direct out. Then delay units refers to all the delay units on the console. So for instance, on the input delay, this unit here, at the moment it's milliseconds. You can make it meters if that's a bit more handy for you. Now it's meters. And then also EQ unit. System. This is mostly giving us feedback on what's busy happening on the console. So obviously, because this is only the computer and the offline editor, it's not connected to any hardware, so there's going to be no input here. Normally this will be green. There's also a fader calibration is under this little menu, so if you have an issue with faders that are dragging or not going to the positions, you can do a fader calibration. Just be note, when you do fader calibration, the system will be offline for a little while. There is a step-to-step guide, obviously, on the console that tells you what to do. All the faders need to go to the up position and then to the bottom position and so on and so forth. Quite straightforward. This also gives us feedback on the DSP engine and the mic card and everything that's in there. Normally, as I said, all of this should be green. It's just because we're running an offline editor here and it's not connected to the hardware. Also information about the stage rack there. There's a few sub-menus when it comes to the network tab, address, wireless mics, the real-time rack, and also mirroring. Obviously at this stage the most important one is just setting up an address. This needs to be highlighted for this section to work. Wireless microphones, this is a feature that's on the console to bring in metadata from certain wireless receivers. So for instance, the Shure and AKG, to use two examples, you can bring that metadata, so the battery strength and the RF strength and maybe what antenna is being used and what frequency, bring it up onto a channel, and this is where you will assign it to a specific channel. This is also stuff that we're all going to cover, but for now, just to know where it is obviously valuable. Real-time rack is the UAD real-time rack that works and integrates with the Soundcraft VI consoles. And then mirror mode is basically what I'm busy running at the moment. It allows me to connect the console to the offline editor. So now I'm moving the fader up and down on that kick channel, and the offline editor is following because it is obviously the slave. Great, so that's everything for this menu. As we go through the course, we will be covering all the topics in these submenus and you will understand exactly what all of them do. But for now, you just want to be able to locate them and know where to find everything. Great guys, thank you for watching. That is everything for today. I hope you guys have a clear understanding now where to find everything on the console and it made sense. If you guys have any questions, now's the time to ask. You can type them out and I'll read them, or you're welcome to make your microphone live and then ask it